So I walked up to one of them and I said, "Drill Sergeant, I think I'm in the wrong place. I'm a medical specialist." He says, "You specialize in combat, motherfucker." My name is William Faery. I was born in Lockport, New York in 1969. My childhood was a little bit unique. My mom is Mexican and my dad's a hillbilly. And I grew up on a junkyard. My uncle owned a junkyard there, and very hillbilly-ish. And it was strange being around a lot of these tough hillbillies. These guys did not play. They did not play. So I was known as Billy back then, and it'd be like, "Billy, get me a beer." And sure, I'd love to get my uncle's beer, and they'd be around playing poker and smoking and drinking. And I grew up with the last name Faery. And so there's, back in those days, there's a lot of teasing and stuff. And there wasn't, how we have this days where, if you got bullied, you got bullied. You better, pick it up yourself. And coming from that hillbilly background, I didn't take too much shit. It wasn't gonna be too long. So I can remember punching a kid in the mouth in kindergarten. Him saying some tooth fairy joke or something like that, and I wasn't having it. And I kind of grew up that way, and kids are cruel. And so I didn't get done with that probably until I graduated high school. I moved from New York to Michigan when I was 10 years old, and we lived in everybody always said here, I lived right about there in Michigan. And it was in the middle of nowhere. And it was no easy way to say it. It was all white people. And they could smell it, that I wasn't all white. Even though I have that hillbilly background, they could smell it. And so I had to deal a little bit with the fairy, and he's not white, and so lots of fights. Moved from there when I was probably in 1984, when I was 14 or so, and moved down to San Antonio, Texas. And I ended up graduating high school from San Antonio. And probably after that, people started growing up a little bit, but there's always the one. There's always one. Right. Even nowadays, there's always one, and you just, knock them down a peg or two right quick. Yeah. But so I moved to San Antonio and decided to go to college, and I just barely scraped into Texas Tech, and all I learned at Texas Tech was how to smoke weed. That was it. I lasted less than a semester there. I got busted coming in from the Lubbock is a dry county. And so we got busted coming in, a minor in possession of alcohol. So I did my one night in jail, and it took me that one night to say I never want to be in jail again. And I learned really quick, but I went home and spent the next 2 years getting high and just not knowing which direction to go. And I've always been a rebellious kid. I didn't like my parents. Years later, I'm like, why was I so mad at my parents? And there was no reason. I was just rebellious. So I had that attitude that no matter what someone told me, I was doing the opposite. Because you're not going to tell me what to do. Right. And just growing up that way, and I ended up getting together with my high school sweetheart, and got her pregnant. And I was still doing my thing, and we had the baby, and one day I just kind of looked at myself and I said, "What are you doing? She's working, you don't have a job, you're carrying the baby, you're getting high, there's got to be something more to life than this." And I didn't, my dad was a worker. I mean, he was blue collar. He worked in a steel mill. He worked as a truck driver. He worked as a car salesman. And so he instilled in us, even though at that teenage time, I didn't see it, but he instilled a good work ethic in us. And so I knew I needed to do something. I had to be responsible in some way. And in 1989, I came home one day. Nobody knew what I was doing. And I came home and said I joined the Army. And they're like, what? And, recruiters, they were like, you're going to be a medical specialist. And I was so happy I'm going to be in the medical field, a specialist. I wonder what I'm going to specialize in. That was the question. I wonder what I'm going to specialize in. And went off to boot camp, and I was scared to death because I knew Faery was going to come up. I knew it, and I said, and I asked my dad, because he was in the military for 4 years. He had joined the Air Force when he was younger. That's when him and my mom met. And I said, Dad, how did you make it through? He said, you'll see. He said, you'll see. And so I went into basic in 89, and this was still at a time when every once in a while they were putting the drill sergeants were putting their hands on people, and cussing was perfectly acceptable. And this was before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, right before that had come in. So they weren't allowing homosexuals in the military. And it was such a bad thing with the last name Faery to have to go in at that time. So I went in, and surprisingly, they mentioned one thing to me. One time, they asked me, and it was scary too, because one guy in basic wanted to get out. He had had enough. I don't want to do basic training. I'm getting out. And so he had said, Drill Sergeant, I want to get out because I'm gay. And every drill sergeant, you know how they come in at you. If one drill sergeant starts yelling, here come all of them. And they started on this guy, and all of them were unbuttoning their pants. If you're gay, suck my dick right now. And it's like, now I'm like scared to death. I'm like, I got to get through this, without them, thinking this.
Yeah.
And it was just one day at the mess hall. Where, of course, you have to eat quick and get out. And I happened to look up at the drill sergeant's table, and my drill sergeant is staring at me. And I'm like, oh, I got to look down. I don't want to, and as a kid, you don't know. So I looked up again, and he's staring at me again. And he said, you. I said, shit. So I go up there and I run and say, yes, drill sergeant. And he goes, have me and you got something going on? Have we got a little bit of this? I said, no, drill sergeant. No, we don't. And he looked at me and he said, and what the hell kind of name is Faery anyway? Get out of my face. That was it. The whole basic training, that was it. I didn't hear another thing about it. I got out. I went back home before I went to my first duty station. And I told my dad. And I said, they just said something to me once about my last name. And he goes, yeah, they didn't say much to you. They didn't say anything to me. And so I thought, you had me scared to death that whole time. But that was my dad's, way.
Yeah,
That's that old hillbilly way. You're going to figure it out yourself.
Wow. Wow.
So I got in the military and I went to school. I went to school in San Antonio, the medic school in San Antonio. So I go in there, and I'm still thinking, what am I going to specialize in? And so I walk up in there day one, and there's this big emblem, medical emblem on the ground. And of course, you can't walk on that emblem. And I see that. So I'm walking around and I look at the emblem, and it says combat medic. And I'm like, well, this isn't what I signed up for. I'm a medical specialist. And in my stupidity, and this was the first cycle that drill sergeants were in the medical school. So they weren't as mean as the other ones. And they asked, so I walked up to one of them and I said, drill sergeant, I think I'm in the wrong place. I'm a medical specialist. He says, you specialize in combat, motherfucker. And I was like, okay, this is the path I have chosen. This is the way. So went through school, and then when I joined, there hadn't been a war or anything for a very long time. So I went to Germany, my first duty station. And 9 months into joining or getting to my first duty station, Desert Shield and Desert Storm hits. I'm freaking out. I'm like, and it sounds stupid now. I did not join the army to go to war.
Yeah.
I did not join up for this. They said money for college. That's it. And so I ended up going, and I was with a combat engineer battalion. So they ride in front of the tanks. We were attached to 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. And so we rode in front of the tanks and cleared minefields. And if anybody still remembers anything about Desert Storm, they said they had the wires around and had minefields and everything going into Kuwait. And it really wasn't that bad. And of course, that war was a massacre. There wasn't very many people that died in Desert Storm, what you would think of war, But we did lose 2, but it was to friendly fire. They had a little encampment where they had some EPWs, some enemy prisoners of war, and something was coming over the hill and the tanks were back here. And so when they grabbed them up and went to come around, I guess the tanks didn't realize who they were, and the tanks shot them up. And that happens a lot.
Yeah.
And if people don't know the desert, I mean, it's pitch black out there. So, I know they got the night vision, but they don't know what they're looking at. And I'm sure someone, unfortunately for them, made a mistake and said, let's fire on these. We think it's the enemy, and took out 2. But it is, that was within a year of me first getting to my first duty station, wow. I was starting off with a war.
Wow, yeah, wow. Yeah.
So it was an exciting time. It was definitely a learning experience. As a medic, got to work on a lot of the Iraqis. And it was like walking through a zoo, as a young kid. And just the way it was set up, we had gotten some prisoners and they were walking them through. And so the whole camp is just sitting there looking at these prisoners because we'd never seen. Most of us are young kids, have never been outside of the United States, and as much just to Germany, so we see Germans. But seeing those people, we're looking at them like, this is a whole new culture. This is a whole new everything. And so there was a lot of rules, a lot of this, a lot of that.
Do you recall your first casualty, working on your first
Absolutely.
Casualty?
Yeah, in Desert Storm.
Yeah, what was that like for you? The first time working on a wounded,
It was exciting. And now the wound wasn't that bad either.
Okay.
It was bad, but it wasn't like someone was gut shot or, something like that. A guy got shot in the foot. And so he was walking through the desert with the white flag. They were doing that a lot back then. They were giving up really quick. And so he's got just some rags wrapped around his foot. And as he's walking through, they're like, Doc, we need you to treat this guy. So I unwrapped it and I looked at it, and his foot was mangled. So that was kind of the first time I really saw something like that. But it wasn't a difficult injury. There's not, what are you going to do? So you just splint it and you wrap it up and you make sure it's clean, because he had dirt and everything through it. And it wasn't like I was in a hospital setting. I was with engineers, in vehicles. So you just got out of your vehicle, you treat them right quick, and you send them to the back. And that was the very first war injury I saw. So I was very proud of myself.
Yeah.
I was like, I handled that pretty well. It was a foot injury.
Yeah. that was your cherry breaker right there.
Yeah. It was a good way to get started, instead of seeing blown up. But come down the road, we go and we see the highway of death, which, we told the Iraqis, get out of Kuwait and do not assemble, do not ride back to back. You need to be spread out and stuff, or we're going to blow you up. Well, they went back to back and they tore up that whole highway. And so we ended up driving through that. There was no survivors, but you saw at that point, you started seeing the burnt bodies. You started smelling that tinny blood smell, which to this day doesn't go away. Sometimes I'm just doing something and I'm like, I smell blood. Like
you're smelling pennies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's just a weird feeling. But I went through that, and then we had a couple more nothing too major. You know, it was either a minor injury or death. You know, there was no in between too much. So it was a good thing to go through that. And then I had this big stint from, when did that happen? 91?
Yeah, around 91, 92 or so.
And then in 2009 was the next combat deployment.
Okay.
So I had a long period in between of, you know, I spent 3 years with the engineers, 10 years with tanks, and then I was like, I'm tired of combat units. And they came up with a good one. I got to work at the MEPS in Louisville, Kentucky. You know, if you work at the MEPS in Los Angeles, that sucks. Louisville, Kentucky. You know, at the beginning, you might have one person on the floor.
Right.
You know, one person trying to get in. Your day's over quick. But I went there, and I was the guy who made you do the duck walk. You know, so that was a nice little break. And then after that, I went back to Germany, and I worked at a clinic in Mannheim, Germany, which was the worst unit ever because it's filled with medics. It built a hatred for medics, for my own kind in me, because it was just constant backstabbing. Who wants to get promoted? Who's going to do this? And everybody's fighting each other, and I couldn't stand it. And then I went to Stuttgart, Germany, and got in an MP company, and that's when I went to Enduring Freedom. So my memory was of Kuwait. And so I thought it was going to be that hot in Afghanistan. And I was like, man, I almost didn't make it to 3 months. I don't know how I'm going to make it a year. And I'm worried about the heat. I'm not even worried about the combat. I'm worried about the heat. Well, we get there and it's not as hot as, it's a little bit hotter than Texas. So you could mentally say, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. But we got there and we got put at a camp, Camp Torkham, which was less than a mile away from Torkham Gate, which was the border with Pakistan. And so a lot of people don't know that's where Alexander the Great went through. So it's a very popular gate that people go through, a lot of supplies, big highway. And the Taliban and ISIS or whoever was there, they loved blowing up that border. They loved blowing it up. So we didn't have any Americans at the border because we knew we were not dumb. We're not going to put people there where they're blowing it up all the time. So we were within the mile, and so you could hear it, boom. And so I'm thinking, here we go. We're going to work. And I was put in a spot, and I'm sure there's other medics who were, but it wasn't really common, and I didn't know any better. That I didn't have a doctor, I didn't have a PA, I didn't have any other medical support. There was one SF medic, and he was on the other side of the camp. So anytime anything happened, he'd always come in late, you know, coming in from the other camp. But besides that, it was me as a staff sergeant and two specialists and a private. And all of us are EMT basics. You know, that's as high as it gets. So they started blowing up the border, and they would bring patients in, and that's where I got a lot of training on these people. And you don't want to say they're training tools, but they're training tools. You know, when you're dealing with other people besides Americans. And so in those, that's where I really started learning what was going on. The first mass cal we had was just, there was like 6 patients. The 5 of them were just, you know, I don't want to say minor wounds, but they weren't the big ones. But the one guy who got blown up, he came in with his foot was in his crotch. And it was just basically an amputation. But it was held on by the muscle, his calf muscle. So it didn't blow off the muscle. So it kind of like a sock, you know, the skin came up and his foot was up there. So that was the first one that I was like, uh-oh, what do we do here? You know, how do you... Because you either have an amputation or you have something you can fix and splint. Well, this was neither, you know? Yeah. So how do you do that? So we ended up, he had a broken femur. He had a chest injury. He was cut right up here in his jaw. And I learned really quick on tourniquets that day because this was blown off. You could just see the bone. It was just almost from the knee down. You could see the tib fib, you know, like right there. And then the foot was up here. So we just kind of brought the foot down because you can't cut it off. You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
So we just brought it down, put it where it was supposed to be, and, splinted it up and put it like that. And we put the tourniquet on. And I started losing vitals. And I'm like, let's, give that special IV where it's going to, put some fluid into his vascular system. And he came back. And I'm like, cool. So I turned it off. And as soon as I turned it off, he started going down again. And I did that about 3 times before it dawned on me, we have a leak. Every time we fill him up and then we stop it, he loses his fluid again. And ended up as those tourniquets on here. And then I noticed in the dirt, I said, he's bleeding out from here. This is where it's happening. So that was a good training tool on tourniquets. Make sure those tourniquets are tight and make sure you double check them. Because there will be movement and they go up. But ended up having 13 MASCALs in 6 months. And so we got good. And it wasn't that we were great medics and we weren't tooting our own horn. It's just that we had so many MASCALs that we got good at it.
Right.
And you become numb to it. They bring bodies in, they do that. And I think, but there's always that one, that kind of gets you. And they had brought in, I think this girl was about, and it wasn't an explosion at the gate. It was something. And they brought a girl in that she was about 8 years old. And I believe the story was they had said she got hit by a car on the highway. But you can tell injuries from getting hit by a car compared to something else. And she wasn't hit by a car. So it was common practice over there that if the dad got mad at the mom, he took it out on the kids. That's just common the way they do it over there. And so we assumed that the dad had crushed this little girl. And I had daughters at that time that were similar in age. And so I'm dealing with this girl and she was just split from here all the way back. Her skull was, cracked. The scalp was open. And I was over doing something and I told one of the other medics, check her breathing, make sure she's breathing. Because I saw something like she would vomited or something, coming out of her mouth or just kind of hanging out of her mouth. And the medic went over there and she said, that's her tongue. Because her tongue was shredded. I don't know how that happened. But that kind of hit me a little bit. And it wasn't a cool feeling. And so I had to step away because I still feel it like right now. So I had to step away for 15 seconds, get myself back together, and then back in the game. And so that was, out of all those things, I mean, we had people blowing up. We've had, in the team, 14, 15 people at one time. No problem. Stick a needle in their chest, do this, do that. We're learning. What do you guys want to do? Getting the MPs involved. You guys save this life. He's not going to make it, but it gives them good training. But that one little girl, she was probably about 8. Somewhere in that age, and she didn't make it. I mean, she just had a massive head injury and she wasn't going to make it. But that when you get injuries like that, what can you do? There's nothing you can do. You got to get them to an emergency room. And because they're not Americans or working for the Americans, they go to the Afghan hospital. And most of them die there from infection or they don't have. So most of it was just Afghans that were getting blown up. And you start realizing, when you get there, they're the enemy. They're not even human. Don't think about it like that. But as you're working on them, you realize, they hurt the same as we do. They're in pain. This is shitty for them too, because a lot of them were just civilians walking across the border. And so you kind of realize that everybody's just a human being. We're stuck in a shitty situation. But when that one time came where I had 2, Americans and Afghans, no different. After that 6-month stint on the border, we moved into somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And a lot of green on blue was going on at that time. So you had someone who's an Afghan who's watching the gate and he takes his rifle and turns it the other way and starts shooting at people. Ooh. So the fobs we were on are just dirt lots. There's no buildings. We were just in the middle of, you could see forever, and you're just in the middle of nowhere. We had a green on blue. And so he started shooting people and someone shot him through the chest. And it came out back here somewhere. And so at this point, at this new fob, I had a PA. So I had someone, thank goodness, that, the way I put it, she knew what she was doing,
Mm-hmm.
a little guidance.
Yeah.
But we had that, and I remember putting combat gauze into the bullet hole, and me and her were standing. So I was kind of pushing it in this way. She's pushing it in, I'm pushing it in, she's pushing it in. And remember looking up at each other with big old smiles on our faces because we're working, and he had just tried to shoot up the camp, so it wasn't a hatred. I imagine if he had done a better job, that there probably would have, but I wasn't in that situation. I remember going out there and just going, balls to the wall, because I'm thinking medic-wise and everybody else is thinking tactically.
Yeah.
And they're like, Doc, quit running out in front of everything.
Right.
They're kind of having more of a correct way of thinking than I was. But I've always been an adrenaline junkie. So I was, even though I still was thinking tactically, if you're not moving fast enough, I'm going.
Yeah.
There's someone hurt too. Shoot, I'm definitely going.
Right.
But that was an interesting time there. We did have mortars come across the camp, and there's a funny story about that was that we were playing cards at night in one of the hooches, and we heard thum, and three of us looked back, and we thought, what was that? Because we hadn't been mortared yet, so we didn't know. And I said, I think that was the bathroom door banging back there. But one guy learned later, he had been through mortars. He looked very serious. He was not, he didn't think it was the bathroom door, and he didn't say anything, but he was just kind of had a squinty eye. And then we heard thum. And I looked back again, and I said, is that the bathroom door or not? And then I kind of stopped talking, and it was like a cartoon. That dude was gone, and his cards were coming down. It's like, wait a minute, what's going on? Then we heard another one right after that, and we said, okay, mortars. We all run into the bunker. Now the mortars, and they're just lobbing them right across the middle of the camp. And here comes a guy into the bunker in a towel and flip-flops. So he got caught in the shower, which is your worst nightmare. And the rest of us had gear on, because we had our gear next to us while we were playing cards. And we get into the bunker, and one hits really close. And I mean, it shakes you. Boom, it hit. And over the radio, they said, we have injured. We need the medics at the aid station. So I get up to go, and my LT grabs my hand. Now, we can hardly see anything in this bunker, but I knew his voice, and he said, don't go yet, Doc. And boom, another one came, and he goes, okay, now go.
Yeah.
So I'm like, thanks for saving my life. See you later, bye.
Yeah.
So I start running across the camp, and it's pitch black, and I'm saying, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, the whole way across. And I get to the aid station, and we have the injured Americans and some Afghans. And we start working. And I didn't like to work because of that situation before. You really weren't in danger. Boy, I hated working with that gear on. So I pull my gear off right away, and start working. And I had this another story, but I had a stupid hoodie on that said T-Bone on the back in like yellow letters.
Okay.
And the hoodie was dark. So I'm in shorts, shower shoes, hoodie, and I had taken my gear off, and I'm working. So we take the patients out to the helicopter. They call in the medevacs. So we had to sit on them a little bit. We take them out there, and we're carrying the things. And because the staff sergeant, I'm kind of directing the people, talking to the guy, telling them what injuries we have, blah, blah, blah. Just doing the norm. Get them on there, and they take off. And I start walking back, and I wish I could remember this guy's name, but there was a private. And he was there in tears. He was like, and I'm like, are you okay? You doing all right? And he said, Sergeant Faery, you're my hero. I was like, what? What are you talking about? He goes, everybody else is in gear and all I see is T-Bone walking across the dark and you're doing nothing and you're in flip-flops. And I kind of laughed and I was going to say you're an idiot. And then I thought really quick, if I was a private, that shit would look cool. So I let him live that. I'm sure he tells that story. There was this crazy guy that did this stuff. But after that, I went back and they said, Sergeant Faery, you got ice running through your veins. And I said, what are you talking about? The PA was saying this. They said, we're hearing a panic and you're just working like it's, you're doing nothing. I said, trust me, I didn't feel that way. I didn't feel it. I said, but I just got done with 13 Mascals over there. So maybe it kicked in. What transitioned me from that, we were still on that same fob. And as the MPs, we'd go and go to Afghan police stations. They didn't have any electricity, no running water. And we would go train them. And off in the distance, there was these clamshells. And like, who's that? And this is back in 2009. So they're like, that's Blackwater. And we're like, ooh, Blackwater. I've heard this stories about that. Those are those high-speed guys that are, contractors. So real quick, one night, an MP falls out of the tower. He catches a head injury. I check him out. It's 2:00 in the morning. And I said, man, we got to take him to the medevac. It's at the Blackwater compound. Well, everybody's happy because Blackwater has good food. They're not worried about this guy with the head injury. They want good food. So we take him over there, and there's the Blackwater medic. He meets me. And he's just this huge guy, what you would picture, Blackwater.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, I got this. He goes, tell me what you got. I said, I got this. He said, all right, we're going to call in the medevac. He goes away. He comes back and he says, something's going on right now. We're going to have to sit on this guy for about 6 hours. And I said, all right, Blackwater medic, what do we do? Tell me this high-speed stuff that you do. And he goes, I don't know. Just do the same thing you've been doing. And at that point, in 2010, I said, I want your job. When I retire, I want your job because you didn't do anything different than I've been doing, and you're getting paid a hell of a lot of money. I want your job. And that was my quest after that deployment. When I retired, that's what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to do.
So we'll get into that right now, transitioning. But earlier you talked to me about having a vehicle rollover. Was that?
Oh, yeah. We were in an MRAP, and the MPs were doing things up and down the road, and so I would get into the back of the vehicle. Well, sometimes you get lazy, and I was well known for getting lazy every once in a while. I was not the best soldier, I was just hanging in there. And I got lazy going in the back where it's in the middle of the night, and I didn't put my seatbelt on. I'm kind of looking out the windows, can't see much. I'm kind of just chilling in the back. And we did a turn or something, and the next thing I know, it's just a split second, the vehicle's turning. So you don't know what's going on in the back because you have no view of if you're not paying attention. So I'm literally start walking the wall, as the vehicle's turning, and that sucker hit hard and knocked me out. And so when I wake up, and if you get knocked out and you wake up, there was no time in between. So I just kind of come to, and there's water coming in the vehicle. And so I have no idea what's going on. That was a scary feeling. No idea what's going on. But this vehicle, we must have gone into a lake or something, and I'm fixing to drown. I look up at the gunner, and the gunner had his gunner strap on. And so his head is in the water. Ooh. And his feet are doing like this, Yeah. So afterwards, that's a funny, way to see. It wasn't funny at the time, but he's doing that. So I reached up and grabbed him, to fix him. And now I'm trying to get out of the back. Well, I was just knocked out. So everything's loopy for me a little bit. And then now everything's upside down. And so I can't figure out how to get that door open because I'm supposed to do it this way and I'm used to doing it this way and I couldn't figure it out. And what seemed like an eternity, which was probably only 10 seconds. After that, someone comes and opens the door. We had went to do a turnaround, and the driver can't see that far, and it's the TC's job to look down. Well, you're in the dark, so the TC didn't see, and we went into a ditch. And so that ditch is filled with shit water and just nasty, and that's what was coming up on us.
So this guy's fucking head was submerged in
His
shit
head
water.
was submerged in shit water, and we gave him shit for it for a while.
No pun, huh?
Yeah. It was, there was little things like that, but being knocked out like that, that there's your TBI. Even though you think later on, did it really affect you? Was it just a concussion? Lots of people get knocked out, and you just see where it rolls from there. But on the retirement side, when I was going through the VA, of course, I brought that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you get done with Afghanistan, you retire shortly after that.
Yes.
Right?
I ended up going to El Paso and getting a really good gig training every medic on the post. Every medic that had to update their license had to come through me. So that was an awesome feeling. And they ended up hearing what I had done in Afghanistan, that I was on my own. And they said, you're going to go speak at the medic conference. And I was like, what do I say? And they're like, just tell about what you're doing. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to say. So I ended up going to San Antonio and speaking in front of 300 officers, generals, doctors, and I had no clue what I was going to talk about because I didn't do any prepping. I guess that's my adrenaline rush. I don't prep for anything. And ended up speaking to them, and it was a whole funny story in there, a little long and drawn out, but I ended up like 2 minutes before I had to speak. I said, I know what I'm going to talk about. And so I got up there, spoke, and talked about medics not saying when they make mistakes. And the reason being, a medic can do 1,000 things right. And when you do one thing wrong, you're a shitty medic. And so we keep that to ourselves. And it's the worst thing in the world because if you make a mistake, you want to teach your soldiers, this is what I did, don't you do that. And so I went up and I had them rolling. They were laughing because they didn't want to admit their mistakes, and I was making them raise their hands and stuff. So I did that, and then I retired. And I think I went through what most people go through, which was a spiral. I started spiraling. I didn't know what to do. I was showing up at work. I'm already retired. I don't know where else to go. I don't know how my job in the military translates outside. I don't want to be in an ambulance because most ambulance deals are sick call. There's an old person, there's a young person, they had taken medications, and I hated that. I always hated things that had to deal with medications and stuff like that. I wanted bullet wounds, I wanted broken legs, I wanted, they were in a blast. And so I started to spiral, and I didn't know what to do. And it was a very panicky time, and the only thing I could think of is if there is no job, I'm going to make a job. And so I started a business teaching local, state, and federal law enforcement tactical medicine.
Nice.
And so that was kind of neat, but I still had put in applications to places. And about 9 months after retiring, Academy calls. And they say, we want you to go to Kabul. And they said, you tell us right now, tell us by tomorrow, or we're going to crumple up your application. Well, if you don't know, Academy was a different name. It was Blackwater. And that was the dream. That was the dream job. So I said, of course, close the business. Let me go do some training. Went there, and as a medic, they were taking, I don't know how I ended up getting that job, but as a medic, you're not allowed in the military to shoot the machine guns. You're not allowed to do certain things. Well, for this job, you had to be proficient. So I had to get proficient quickly. So they asked the question, have you ever shot a machine gun before? I said, yes, I have. I've shot a machine gun, a 249 once. And that was the MP saying, hey, Doc, you want to fire this? I said, sure. Come on up. It's already loaded for you. Everything going. Okay, let me shoot it. Clink. Get back, Doc. Get back. You know, we'll fix that. You know, this is misfire. Okay, get back up there. That was the one time I shot anything like that. But I did it.
Right.
So it worked for the application. And getting to do that and having to learn how to clear rooms, having to learn on the fly. You know, I had 40 some days to become a professional at doing that. And I was scared to death, but I did it.
Yeah.
I did it. I made it. And they sent me to Kabul. And I was there for 8 years.
Wow.
8 years I was in Kabul.
I bet you see a bunch of more shit out there. Or?
You know, it's kind of a different thing. I was personal security for the ambassador and other dignitaries who would come. So a lot of Congress people, a lot of bureaucrats that you don't even know who they are, things like that. So, but you have your certain teams. Another company was like, would watch the gates. And, but ours was like I really don't want to say elite, but it was really good people doing that job. And in doing that job, we have a quick reactionary force, a QRF. And so they put me on QRF at one point. And I said, you guys don't want me on QRF. And they were like, why, Doc? I said, because I'm a mass cal magnet. Shit goes down when I'm in the wrong place. They're like, we haven't seen anything like that. In a week, we have a mass cal. In a week, we have a mass cal. And a guy on a motorcycle went to the DEA compound in Kabul, and the people went around it, and boom, he blew it up. So QRF goes out to deal with that. Now, that was a fun one, because now from being in the military and looking up to those Blackwater medics, now I'm that medic. So we drive up to the place, and I get out, and I have civilian clothes on with all the gear, and I got 2 radios. And once again, I live in a comic book world. I know what I look like. It's got to be badass the way I look, right? And so I got the headphones on and stuff, and I open up the doors to get out, and every nurse, civilian nurse, and everything here, because they're on the ground, look at me and see me, and rule of the contracting world: whatever you do, look good doing it. So, you know, we look like contractors coming out.
Right.
And they look at me, and I know the look in their face. He's here. There's the contractor medic, the Blackwater medic.
Yeah.
I can see it because I felt it before. I've been through that. And they start coming up to me and asking me, we got this many people. We got that many people. I said, all right, hold on. What do we got here? So the doctor comes over, and so I start walking around and seeing what they have. And all I do is tell them, make sure that tourniquet's tight. You might want to wrap that's this way. You know, did you check his breathing? When's the last time you got his vitals? I didn't touch a patient. But I was in charge somehow. and the doctors are looking, and then I had to load them up, and it's just a weird situation. I was just married to my 3rd wife at this time. And after we had got those people out, we had to take some of the bodies away. So I had a body here, and then half of the bag is pieces, you know. So I put that between my feet, and I call my wife. And I'm like, you would not believe how my day at work was today. And I didn't tell her any of that, you know. She just knew something had happened.
Yeah.
And I told her when I got home. It was some time afterwards. But I said, this one. She goes, you called me in the middle of that? I said, yeah, well, you know.
Yeah.
I had to have someone to talk to. I had that contracting job all the way up till the Taliban took over the city. So I left on, I can't remember the date, the 13th of whatever. So 2 days before the Taliban came in, I got on a plane and came out. And so at that time, 2 days before they came in, they said, you are leaving. See you when you get back in 35 days. And then 2 days later, the city's overtaken. They're on the embassy grounds. I don't have a job. I'm not going back there. And so here comes the spiral again. You know, luckily I recognized it. And you cannot, and it still happens. Everybody's going to have their own way to deal with it. I have a really stupid way, and I laugh at it myself, that I deal with it, that I'll recognize that I'm getting lethargic. I'll recognize that I'm not talking to people, and this is like in a day or two, I start going down, and I start getting emotional a little bit. I feel something's here, and it's a depression coming, and I recognize it. And that's before you're down the drain, you need to recognize that and say, that's okay. Everybody can get depressed. This is me getting depressed. And so what I do is I watch YouTube videos of like America's Got Talent or stuff. And those people that have the bad background, had a tough life. And now they're just, I get emotional even talking about it because that's my thing.
Right.
They just shine. That's their moment. They just shine. And I cry like a baby. I cry like a baby because I'm so happy for them. And gets that emotion out. If you're holding that in, it's got nowhere to go. It's going to stay with you. It's going to grow in you. It's going to stick. And I've learned over the years that was just something that worked. I can't remember how I found out it worked, but it did. And when I feel that emotion, I get up. Number one, get up off the couch, get up and do something. So even though you don't feel like it, I don't wait till I'm curling in a ball on the bed. I recognize it and get up immediately. Go to the gym, cook, go in the backyard and do something. Get outside, blow the stink off you, and you find a certain way to deal with it. A lot of people don't want to talk to other people about it because we all, it's hard to explain to other people that have no idea, what that sinking feeling is. And we get a little bit, I don't know what the word is. I don't want to say arrogant, but in those feelings, you're like, nobody understands what I'm going through. I was a soldier, these other people that are suffering from depression, they're pussies because that's nothing compared to what I've been through. And so we don't want to talk to anybody. We don't want to let it out or do that. I've become a very open book on talking about stuff like this because that's what changed in me. So you see me energetic. You see me this. I make myself be that way because I don't want to be the other way.
Right. Awesome.
And it's something you work in. That little stupid video, I found out that works for me.
That's great.
And so people have to learn what works for them. And I think it's that release of the emotion. And you don't have to cry in front of people. I go in my bedroom and watch this stuff.
Right.
Nobody has to see it. Nobody has to see what I go through. And then I come out and I'm good. And then I feel, there's an emotion, crying through joy, and that's what I'm doing. I'm crying through joy, watching these people be successful, but it's still that emotion that's getting out.
Yeah.
And you just have to release it. I mean,
awesome.
That's the best way to do it.
That's great, man. That's great.
Last words. If anybody's out there that is going through those spirals or are trying to figure out what to do, their job doesn't translate to the civilian world, you're not alone. You're not alone. A lot of us, we don't know exactly how you personally feel, but we're in the ballpark. We're all in the ballpark. So don't feel alone. Don't feel alone. Let that emotion out. If you feel good talking to people, talk to people. If you feel good being on your own and just, smelling flowers or whatever, then you do that. But just don't allow yourself, recognize when you feel that spiral coming.
Yeah.
And then you get yourself together and get out of it.
Right. Right. Well, hey, William, really appreciate you taking a seat, man. It's a big contribution to Urban Valor, so thank you very much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Love doing it.
Take care, brother.
Thank you.
Push it to the limit, I can't go no more. Red light, no way, I'm coming back home. Long dirt road.